Secretary General, President of the General Assembly, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by welcoming you all to this special high-level event to commemorate the International Day to Combat Islamophobia. At the outset, I would like to thank the President of the General Assembly for co-convening today's event. Now, I shall proceed to read my opening statement as chair of today's commemorative meeting. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, let me once again thank the President of the General Assembly for joining the OIC in co-convening the first ever commemoration of the International Day to Combat Islamophobia. I also welcome you all to this historic event. The observance of this day serves to reinforce our shared commitment to raise awareness about the insidious phenomenon of Islamophobia and advance mutual respect and understanding and develop concrete measures to eradicate this menace. Excellencies, Islam is a religion of peace, tolerance, and pluralism. The Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, taught Muslims to treat everyone with dignity and respect, regardless of race, culture, gender, or religion. Yet unfounded phobia of Islam and its adherents is a sad reality of our times. This phenomenon is neither new nor an irrational bias held by a few, as so often portrayed. The challenge before us is much deeper and deeply rooted. Since colonial times, the entrenched notion that depicts Muslims and their beliefs as cultural others, threats, and have served to perpetuate, validate, and normalize Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hatred. Since the tragedy of 9/11, animosity and institutional suspicion of Muslims and Islam across the world have only escalated to epidemic proportions. A narrative has been developed and peddled which associates Muslim communities and their religion with violence and danger. This Islamophobic narrative is not just confined to an extremist, marginal propaganda, but regrettably has found acceptance by sections of mainstream media, academia, policymakers, and state machinery. Islamophobia is therefore being constantly fueled by structural discrimination, xenophobia, and negative stereotyping of Muslims and their faith. Excellencies, the tragic events in Christchurch and several other atrocities are a grim reminder that the tide of Islamophobia is sweeping across the globe. It is obvious in the manifestation of far-right and neo-fascist parties, in the open calls for the expulsion and exclusion of Muslims, in the politicization and censorship of the hijab, in the provocative burning of the Holy Quran, in deliberate defamation of our Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and the vandalization of Islamic symbols and holy sites. We should not underestimate the resentment and sense of injustice felt by Muslims in reaction to such Islamophobic acts. Their faith is a deeply personal issue for Muslims. The exercise of the right to freedom of expression carries with it responsibilities and obligations not to disseminate racist ideas or defame and ridicule religious symbols and religious personalities. And despite protestations to the contrary, Islam and Muslims are routinely linked to terrorism. In some cases, the rhetoric of hate and incitement to violence is officially inspired. Repeated pogroms of Muslims have been instigated by officially sanctioned neo-fascist policies and ideologies with complete immunity. The policies and violent actions of those who deny the right of self-determination of Muslim peoples represents one of the worst forms, one of the worst manifestations of Islamophobia today. Islamophobia has been whipped up in cyberspace. Digital and social media platforms are being used pervasively and systematically to spread hatred against Muslims and incite violence. This has unfortunately been the situation even during the COVID pandemic, when a tsunami of anti-Muslim hatred and Islamophobic narratives surged on digital platforms. At times, it appears that those who manage these digital platforms are sympathetic to the extremist anti-Muslim groups and ideologies. Ladies and gentlemen, despite its pervasive and widely documented manifestations, Islamophobia remains under-acknowledged, poorly understood, and less effectively countered. The dangers of Islamophobia often gain international attention when a heinous act of violence and terrorism strikes innocent Muslims, while the daily silent drip of discrimination, hatred, and hostility against Muslims remains largely ignored and underreported. Therefore, our resolve to combat Islamophobia must translate into concrete and practical action. To that end, we urge the UN Secretary-General to formulate an action plan in coordination with the Organization of Islamic Countries to halt and reverse Islamophobia. Such an action plan could include the appointment of a UN Special Envoy to combat Islamophobia, the adoption of international measures for the protection of holy sites, including the thousands of mosques and mausoleums which are presently under threat of destruction, the adoption of laws at the national and international level to outlaw hate speech, acts of vandalism of the Holy Quran, and discrimination and violence against Muslims and other communities, the provision of legal assistance and appropriate compensation to those subjected to Islamophobic acts, and the establishment of national and international judicial mechanisms and laws to hold those responsible for acts of Islamophobia accountable. Excellencies, unfortunately, the virus of Islamophobia is spreading faster than we have been able to react. Not even the greatest democracies are immune. We have witnessed democratic societies impose Muslim bans. So-called free societies allow for the desecration of holy texts and holy sites. And even my region is not immune, with democratic secular societies under the threat of being transformed into religious, nationalist, and Islamophobic states. The declaration of the 15th of March is the International Day to Combat Islamophobia by the General Assembly, and today's high-level event is a demonstration of global solidarity with both known and unknown victims of Islamophobia. Today, we must renew our resolve to build an inclusive society where different cultures and beliefs are celebrated and diversity is embraced. We can ill afford to ignore dangerous ideologies and acts dividing us as humanity. Let all of us, from any religion or creed, stand together in the fight against hatred, bigotry, and intolerance. I thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to invite the President of the General Assembly to give his remarks.
Mr. Secretary General, Minister Bhutto Zardari, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm honored to be a co-convener of today's event affirming the need to combat Islamophobia. I thank Pakistan and the OIC for drawing global attention to this important issue. Last year's unanimous adoption of the General Assembly's resolution on it speaks volumes about the need for a global dialogue to encourage tolerance and peace. A dialogue that should be based, to quote the resolution, on the respect for human rights and the diversity of religions and beliefs. Yes, the freedom of every religion and belief. As a believer myself, I wholeheartedly support this notion. You, the member states, recognized with deep concern the rise in discrimination, intolerance, and violence against members of many religious and other communities across the world, including cases raised by Islamophobia. And with the establishment of this International Day, you vowed to do something about it. Like so many such social ills, Islamophobia is rooted in xenophobia, the fear of strangers, of foreigners, or to put it in more exactly, the fear of whatever is unfamiliar. According to the American writer H.P. Lovecraft, the oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of it is fear of unknown. We see the reflections of this fear in discriminatory practices, travel bans, hate speech, bullying, and targeting of others, sometimes just for their clothing. We see it in the generalized and unjustified worries stoked by bigots and populists, and in the coverage of Muslims in a part of the media as threats to certain ways of life. Its harmful effects are amplified in social media, often by extremists who use this negative stereotyping as a tool for recruitment into their ranks. On the other hand, unfortunately, we often see cases when teachings of the religion are hijacked and usurped by policies unreconcilable with the original true intentions. And the extremist actions are often followed by blanket opinions and reactions without distinction. All over the world, there are political movements and parties who want to benefit from spreading the myth that any foreigner or believer of a different faith can only be an enemy with evil intentions. And they have a significant following, including many who are always happy to blame somebody else for their own failures. Islamophobia is part of a broader resurgence of ethno-nationalism, supremacy, stigma, and hate that are targeting religious, national, ethnic, and linguistic communities. It is on us all to reverse these trends by embracing diversity and safeguarding the rights of minorities. Freedom of religion or belief is guaranteed by the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. This is an international law that must not be breached in any country. I call on every member state to uphold this fundamental freedom. All of us carry a responsibility to challenge Islamophobia or any similar phenomenon, to call out justice, call out injustice, and condemn discrimination based on religion or belief or the lack of it. Education is key to learning why social phobias exist. Indeed, it can change our understanding of one another. It can be transformative, making Islam understood instead of keeping it unknown can be crucial in dealing with the phenomenon of Islamophobia. Because, to quote the New York writer Christian Bouvet, we fear things in proportion to our ignorance of them. Let us struggle against that ignorance. Let us show the real nature of Islam or any other religion. Interfaith and intercultural exchanges that unite us around shared values can also help a lot. Social media companies should also do more by removing hate speech from their platforms and curbing the spread of disinformation. It is critically important that women and young people are involved in these efforts. Women's voices should be equally included in discussions around Islamophobia like the one we are having today. Their important role is shaping Muslim communities was well emphasized during the Women in Islam event earlier this week. Dear friends, in 1945, the UN emerged from a climate of fear and distrust as an advocate for all peoples. Marking this International Day, let's continue to advance our shared values of solidarity and mutual respect that have been underpinning our UN Charter. As the saying goes, we build too many walls and not enough bridges. Let us turn to building more bridges. I thank you وأتمنى لكم مزيدا من النجاح لهذا المؤتمر وشكرا جزيلا.
Thank you, President of the General Assembly, for your important statement. I'm pleased to invite the Secretary General, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, to deliver his statement.
Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs of Pakistan, Mr. President of the General Assembly,
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I thank Pakistan and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation for focusing attention and calling for action to stamp out the poison of Islamophobia. The world's nearly 2 billion Muslims reflect humanity in all its magnificent diversity. They hail from all corners of the world. They're Arabs, Africans, Europeans, Americans, and Asians. But they often face bigotry and prejudice for no other reason than their faith. This anti-Muslim hatred takes many forms. There is the structural institutional discrimination. It manifests itself in socio-economic exclusion, discriminatory immigration policies, and unwarranted surveillance and profiling. It reveals itself in the wholesale stigmatization of Muslim communities. And it is reinforced by biased media representations and shamefully by the anti-Muslim rhetoric and policies of some political leaders. Beyond structural Islamophobia, Muslims suffer personal attacks, hateful rhetoric, and stereotyping. And many such acts of intolerance and suspicion may not be reflected into official statistics, but they degrade people's dignity and our common humanity. The linkage between anti-Muslim hatred and gender inequality are unmistakable. We see some of the worst impacts in the triple discrimination against Muslim women because of their gender, ethnicity, and faith. The growing hate that Muslims face is not an isolated development. It is an inexorable part of the resurgence of ethno-nationalism, neo-Nazism, white supremacist ideologies, and violence in targeting vulnerable populations, including Muslim, Jews, some minority Christian communities, and others. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, discrimination diminishes us all, and it is incumbent on all of us to stand up against it. We must never be bystanders to bigotry. We must strengthen our defense, and this means pushing for policies that fully respect human rights and protect religious and cultural identities, particularly of minorities. Our UN Plan of Action on to safeguard religious sites provides concrete recommendations to support governments so that all can enjoy their right to observe religious rituals in safety. We must recognize diversity not as a threat, but as a richness of our societies. And this means ramping up political, cultural, and economic investments in social cohesion. And we must confront bigotry wherever and whenever it rears its ugly head. This includes working to tackle the hate that spreads like wildfire across the internet. That is why I've called on governments, regulators, technology companies, and the media to step up guardrails and enforce them. We have launched the United Nations Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech to provide a framework for our support to member states to counter this scourge while respecting freedom of expression and opinion. As part of our common agenda, we are working on a global digital compact for an open, free, inclusive and secure digital future for all, firmly anchored in human rights and non-discrimination. And we are pushing for a code of conduct to promote integrity in public information so people can make choices based on fact, not fiction, education, not ignorance. And I will consider with interest the new suggestions presented today by the Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs of Pakistan. And I'm grateful to religious leaders across the world who are joining hands to promote dialogue and interfaith harmony. The Declaration Human Fraternity for World Peace and Living Together, co-authored by His Holiness Pope Francis and His Eminence the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Sheikh Ahmed El-Taib, is a model for compassion and human solidarity. Excellencies, we are just days away from the beginning of Ramadan. For well over a millennium, Islam's message of peace, compassion and grace has inspired people the world over. The very word Islam derives from the same root word salam, peace. As UN High Commissioner for Refugees, I saw the generosity of Muslim countries welcoming people forced to flee their homes, while so many others closed their borders. I saw the modern manifestation of what is found in the Surah Al-Tawbah of the Holy Quran, and I quote, "And if anyone seeks your protection, then grant him protection so that he can hear the words of God, and then escort him where he can be secure." End of quote. This protection should be accorded to believers and non-believers alike, again according to the Holy Quran. And what a remarkable articulation of refugee protection centuries before the 1951 Refugee
Every great faith and tradition summons the imperatives of tolerance, respect, and mutual understanding. At the heart, we are dealing with universal values. They animate the United Nations Charter and lie at the core of our quest for justice, human rights, and peace. Let us keep striving to realize these values and protect the sanctity and dignity of every human life. Let us counter the forces of division by reaffirming our common humanity. And let us always stand in solidarity with our Muslim brothers and sisters. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary-General for his participation and his pertinent and inspiring remarks. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I now invite the meeting to hear the video statement by His Excellency Mr. Hussein Brahman Taha, Secretary-General of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation.
J'aimerais de prime abord rendre
At the outset, on behalf of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and on my own behalf, allow me to pay tribute to the martyrs, victims of the tragic incident that occurred in Christchurch, New Zealand, on the 15th of March 2019. May Allah, the Almighty, provide their families, who must bear such a dreadful loss, with continued solace and perseverance. Each year, our collective memory recalls such a horrible tragedy, which would certainly bring us to a profound sadness. It tells us that hatred could always manifest into a disastrous violence, especially when it is committed on the grounds of faith or religion. It also sends us a constant warning that such terrible incidents might reoccur at any moment, anywhere on this planet. 3 years after the said terrorist attacks, in March 2022, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the landmark resolution 76/254 that proclaims the 15th of March the International Day to Combat Islamophobia, which we are commemorating today. Therefore, on this commemorative day, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the OIC, commends the achievement of the United Nations for the designation of this day as the International Day to Combat Islamophobia, which was a pivotal step towards concrete global actions needed to combat the threats of incitement to hatred, discrimination, and violence based on one's religion. It would also serve as a continuous reminder about the danger of violence based on religion or belief, and at the same time an opportunity for the international community to reiterate its commitment to fighting xenophobia and to promoting the values of tolerance, understanding, interfaith harmony, and peaceful coexistence among different religions. Religious hatred and intolerance must not be given the slightest space in our societies. Therefore, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation calls upon all countries, as well as international and regional organizations, to commemorate the 15th of March as the International Day to Combat Islamophobia, as part of our collective efforts to combat incitement to hatred and intolerance based on religion or belief, and promote dialogue and mutual understanding. I thank you.
On your behalf, I wish to thank the Secretary-General of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Excellencies, I now invite the meeting to hear the video statement from the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief.
I would like to thank the Foreign Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan in his capacity as the chair of the 28th OIC Council of Foreign Ministers and the President of the General Assembly for inviting me to participate in this important event to commemorate the International Day to Combat Islamophobia. And I particularly welcome its aim to identify ways to promote the right to freedom of religion or belief and combat intolerance and human rights violations against all people. It is an honor for me to participate in the company of such distinguished speakers. I apologize that it clashes with my interactive dialogue as Special Rapporteur in Geneva, hence my inability to be with you in person in New York. The topic is of utmost importance for the mandate. As we all know, the right to freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief is a foundational human right. It is the right of everybody to freely hold thought, conscience, religion, and belief, to change religion or belief, and also be able to manifest and share those beliefs as upheld in international human rights instruments. All individuals, regardless of their faith or belief, or whether they belong to a religious majority or minority, equally enjoy the right to freedom of religion or belief. They must not suffer intolerance or discrimination on the basis of their religion or belief, that is, any exclusion, distinction, restriction, or preference based on religion or belief, nor any impairment of the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise of their human rights and fundamental freedoms on an equal basis with others. The General Assembly Resolution 76254 that proclaimed 15th of March as the International Day to Combat Islamophobia condemned all the acts of violence, incitement to violence, and discrimination against people of all religions or beliefs, including Muslims, in various parts of the world. I warmly welcome this inclusivity, as indeed, ultimately, the attack on one is an attack on us all and diminishes all of us. As highlighted in my first thematic report to the Human Rights Council, that is AHRC 5238, as mandate holder, my work is closely guided by a victim-centered approach grounded in the actual experiences of intolerance and discrimination on grounds of religion or belief, or of other human rights violations that have been carried out in the name of religion or belief. My predecessor, Professor Ahmad Shahid, in a prominent report in March 2021, outlined that suspicion, discrimination, and hatred towards Muslims had risen to epidemic proportions. The patterns of discrimination, hostility, violence, and human rights violations against Muslim individuals and communities described by Professor Shahid strike at the heart of freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief, since, as he stated, it can jeopardize the ability of affected Muslims to be Muslim, to manifest their religious belief, either individually or in community with others, in public or private, in worship, observance, practice, and teaching, violating their right to freedom of religion or belief, as well as a myriad other human rights. During these first 8 months in the mandate, and jointly with other international experts, through both communications and press statements, I have transmitted to governments of different countries concern over violations of the freedom of religion or belief of Muslims. These have included arbitrary and discriminatory detention, torture and ill treatment, patterns of discrimination in economic and social life because of their religious affiliation, or contexts of widespread incitement to hostility and violence against Muslims as religious minorities, which in some cases also led to an enhanced risk of gender-based violence. These violations, as well as recent incidents of religious intolerance in a few European countries, are a reminder of the need to respect human rights standards holistically. On the positive side, states have clear guidelines and tools at their disposal to counteract religious intolerance and strengthen their efforts to promote a culture of tolerance and peace for all and at all levels, based on respect for human rights, and particularly of freedom of religion or belief, as General Assembly Resolution 76254 calls for. The human rights standards and frameworks in the field of freedom of religion or belief and freedom of opinion and expression, for example, are among the most elaborate of the norms that the international community has consulted about in recent years. These build on the 1981 UN Declaration on the elimination of all forms of intolerance and of discrimination based on religion or belief. The Rabat Plan of Action on the prohibition of advocacy of national, racial, or religious hatred that constitutes incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence, adopted in 2012, supports states to gain a better understanding about what constitutes incitement to national, racial, or religious hatred, while ensuring full respect for freedom of expression and opinion. The international community has also invested much diplomacy to advance a concrete framework for combating religious intolerance, stigmatization, discrimination, and violence based on religion or belief. Resolution 1618 was first adopted in 2011 by the UN Human Rights Council as a reaffirmation of state obligations and commitments. Whilst concerned about actions that willfully exploit tensions or target individuals on the basis of their religion or belief, and instances and incidents of stigmatization and of intolerance, it acknowledges the positive role of expression and dialogue. The 8 lines of action it outlines, as drawn from the speech of the former Secretary General of the Organization of Islamic Conference, now of course the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, Professor Ehsan Olu. These lines of action constitute a roadmap for fostering a domestic environment of religious tolerance, peace, and respect. Resolution 1618 itself has a dedicated mechanism to follow up on the implementation of the action plan, as was set out in the resolution, the Istanbul process, which also has implementation reports that are facilitated by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. These recent normative clarifications of standards, framework, and follow-up do not in themselves prevent all instances, attacks, and incidents of intolerance and discrimination against Muslims and other religious or belief groups. However, together with the treaty standards and associated jurisprudence, together with other plans of action and collaborative initiatives for peer-to-peer learning and relevant special procedures, they offer a clear human rights approach to addressing such challenges. These points were captured in a joint press release that was released earlier this week on March 6th, along with the Under-Secretary General, the Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, myself, and the UN Special Rapporteurs on freedom of opinion and expression, on minority issues, and on cultural rights. Government representatives and leaders in all sectors of society, including religious leaders, have a crucial role in speaking out against acts of intolerance and violence based on religion or belief. In fact, in renewing this mandate last year, the Human Rights Council requested that my mandate draw attention to this matter. These expressions of condemnation are extremely powerful and effective when they also come from leaders of other faiths who join their voices against any act of intolerance on the basis of religion or belief. Similarly, when states speak out, they can be more impactful when they refrain from focusing only on one group of concern, but when states systematically uphold at the international and national levels the right to freedom of religion or belief for all religious or belief communities that are facing discrimination and intolerance. We should also not underestimate the potential role that inspiration, volition, and action drawing from religion or belief can play in advancing respect for the human rights of everyone. Similarly, collaboration amongst faith-based actors, civil society organizations, actors at the international level, from academia, when these actors share expertise and know-how in the fight against religious or belief intolerance, then we will gain traction. Civil society space needs to be therefore kept free, open, unhindered, without control and surveillance, in order for it to be able to carry out this positive role. Let me conclude by reaffirming my commitment towards combating religious intolerance, stigmatization, discrimination, incitement to violence, and violence against Muslims and all other groups targeted on grounds of their religion or belief. I stand ready to support states and all other actors devoted to eradicating religious or belief intolerance, and to help them in exploiting the full potential of the instruments that have been outlined in this statement, plans of actions and initiatives that have been created to aid us towards this end. Thank you very much.
On your behalf, I wish to thank the Special Rapporteur for her important statement. We are joined by His Excellency Miguel Moratinos, the High Representative of the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations through video link. I would like to invite him to share his remarks with us.
Your Excellency, Mr. Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, Foreign Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, Excellencies, President of Mr. Sava Korozi, President of General Assembly, Excellencies and distinguished delegates. Thank you for inviting me to this important event. I cannot join you in person due to being in an overseas mission. At the outset, I would like to commend the Islamic Republic of Pakistan for its successful chairmanship of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, including hosting today this commemorative event. I hope that this platform provided by the International Day to Combat Islamophobia will contribute to and complement other efforts aiming at a better understanding of Islamophobia and help to identify how best to address this phenomena. The rise in Islamophobia around the world is an affront to fundamental human rights, including freedom of religion or belief. Perpetuating discrimination, hostility, stigmatization, and violence toward Muslim individuals and communities undermines the dignity and their sense of belonging to the society in which they live. Anti-Muslim bigotry undercuts the ability of affected Muslims to practice their faith openly and safely. The growing manifestation of intolerance based on religion or belief can generate hatred and violence among individuals from and within different nations and may have serious implications at the national, regional, and international levels. Such manifestations include cowardly attacks on places of worship, desecration of sacred sites, burning of holy books, and insulting reverend religious figures. In this context, I wish to reiterate that respect for all religion and culture and advancing interreligious, interfaith, and intercultural dialogue are a cornerstone of UNOSC mandate. I'm very pleased that the UN General Assembly resolution for the International Day to Combat Islamophobia takes note of the call for mutual respect, which my office issued in 2021, reaffirming that all world religions espouse tolerance and peaceful coexistence in a spirit of shared humanity, and call for rejection of those who falsely and maliciously invoke religion to score political gains, create misconception, fuel division, and spread fear and hatred. The same resolution referred to the protection of places of worship in OPEC 2, calling for a strengthened international effort to foster a global dialogue on the promotion of a culture of tolerance and peace at all levels, based on respect for human rights and for the diversity of religion and belief, and strongly deplore all acts of violence against persons on the basis of their religion or belief, and such acts directed against their places of worship, as well as all attacks on and in religious places, sites and shrines that are in violation of international law. I wish to reiterate my commitment to work with you to combat Islamophobia and discrimination based on religion or belief. I thank you.
Thank you, High Representative, for sharing your valuable thoughts. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and now I would like to open the floor for interventions. And we have the Deputy Permanent Representative of Venezuela, the group statement on behalf of the Group of Friends in Defense of the UN Charter.
I thank you, Honorable Minister. In the interest of time, I will deliver an abridged version of our statement. Mr. President, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela has the honor to take the floor on behalf of the Group of Friends in defense of the Charter of the United Nations. At the outset, allow us to convey our appreciation to both the Foreign Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan and Chairman of the 48th Council of the Foreign Ministers of the OIC, and to the President of the General Assembly for jointly convening this special high-level event to commemorate the first International Day to Combat Islamophobia. Similarly, we would like to transmit also our gratitude to the UN Secretary General, the Secretary General of the OIC, the High Representative for the UN Alliance of Civilization, and to all other speakers in the program for their much valuable reflections on this important day in favor of diversity, respect for all religions or beliefs, including Islam, and above all, the promotion of tolerance and peace. Mr. President, the Group of Friends has the strong conviction to firmly promote, preserve, and defend the Charter of the United Nations, including the purposes and principles enshrined therein, as a guarantee of peace and balance in the international order, on the basis of a spirit of inclusivity, respect for diversity, for national sovereignty, for the legal equality of states, for the peaceful settlement of disputes, for social progress, and for the attainment of human rights within the framework of a reinvigorated, effective, and inclusive multilateralism. One of the main pivots of political action to make these convictions a reality is the promotion of intercultural and interreligious dialogue at all levels, as part of the mutual recognition of cultural diversity and of our common endeavors in favor of a culture of peace. Since immemorial time, intolerance and the supremacist desire of some groups within cultures and religions have promoted armed conflicts and interventionist policies aimed at imposing their convictions on others, including through violent means. The spirit of the United Nations, contained in its founding charter and which emanated after the victory of humanity back in 1945, is precisely the reflection of the collective desire that the peoples of the United Nations do not wish to repeat that past of exceptionalist and supremacist ideas, but instead desire to live in peace, in a world of dialogue and coexistence, despite any political, religious, and cultural difference there may exist, and both praising our commonalities while embracing our diversity. Unfortunately, Mr. President, this aspiration has been tarnished by sectarianism of some individuals that, based on their religious beliefs, have promoted multiple manifestations of prejudice, discrimination, hatred, persecution, racial profiling, negative stereotyping, stigmatization, terrorism, and violent extremism conducive to terrorism, in order to impose their ideas and generate suffering on others. In this context, we reject and condemn all expressions of violence against people on the basis of their religion or belief. Regrettably, these expressions have multiplied in recent years, as demonstrated by an increase in the number of terrorist attacks claimed by criminal organizations that intend to justify their heinous acts by wrongly attributing them to a certain religion or belief. In this context, we cannot overemphasize the importance of ensuring that terrorism and violent extremism conducive to terrorism never be associated with a given religion, nationality, civilization, or ethnic group. Having said that, the discourse of hate and exclusion, exacerbated by digital media or political expressions in favor of supremacist discourse, the most extreme of which are Nazism and neo-Nazism, represent a major concern, especially in the midst of the current international juncture. The international community must therefore act decisively to condemn all these manifestations of hatred and intolerance without double standards in order to both prevent and combat their derivative violence. Mr. President, on the first International Day to Combat Islamophobia, to be commemorated from now on every 15 March, the group of friends raises its voice against the stigmatization, prejudice, and attacks against the Islamic faith, which have had manifestations of different kinds in various regions of the world, in some cases regretfully tolerated by some political sectors. According to the most recent report of the OIC Islamophobia Observatory, in the last 22 years, this unfortunate phenomenon has largely increased, particularly in some regions, continents, or societies where there is no Muslim preeminence. Similarly, as a result of the pandemic, its manifestation in virtual environments has also been amplified and has thus grown considerably. We stand in firm solidarity with all the victims of hatred against Islam and share the conviction expressed by its leaders and believers about the legacy of peace, empathy, and progress that the practice of their religion has sown for their very own lives, spirits, and societies during many centuries, while strongly advocating for their inalienable right to freely practice and profess their faith in line with Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is to celebrate its 75th anniversary later this year. On a positive note, we also seize this opportunity to note ongoing international initiatives aimed at advancing interreligious, interfaith, and intercultural dialogue, including those promoted by the UN Alliance of Civilizations and those foreseen in the Declaration and Program of Action on a Culture of Peace, as well as the multiple programs coming from faith-based organizations aimed at advancing international peace and security, sustainable development, and human rights. We wish to make special reference to the actions carried out by the OIC, which actively promotes global awareness of Islamophobia and the importance of generating an environment of mutual trust for the practice of different religious manifestations on the basis of respect and mutual understanding. Mr. President, to conclude, the group of friends reaffirms its unwavering determination to continue making political and programmatic contributions in order to ensure that sooner rather than later, all manifestations of violence and hatred based on religion become a history of the past. Realizing this common goal will require, nevertheless, the genuine commitment of all states, as well as of faith-based organizations and society as a whole, in order to recognize once and for all that cultural and religious diversity enriches us and generates paths towards sustainable development to the extent that guarantees are provided so that everyone can exercise their religion or belief freely and without impositions, in line with the spiritual call for love and coexistence that all faiths profess. Today we say, for the common good of humanity, and mindful of the fact that we live in a community with a shared future, that those things that may divide us, hurt us, or keep us apart shall never, ever prevail. And it is thus our duty to foster an effective culture of peace with tolerance, dialogue, and respect, including for fundamental human rights at its core, in order to enable us to build true links of friendship between all peoples, in spite of that diversity that for centuries and to date continues enriching in our common heritage. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And now I request Mr. Mohammed Al-Atiq, representative of Saudi Arabia, to deliver the group statement on behalf of Arab Group.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Yus'iduni.
In the name of God, the gracious, the merciful, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the member countries of the Arab League. Thank you, Mr. President, for organizing this important meeting to commemorate the International Day to Combat Islamophobia. I would also like to take this opportunity to tell you, on behalf of the Arab Group, and here I am addressing you, Mr. President, and your delegation, the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, for having organized this commemoration today here in the General Assembly Hall with the participation of all member states. This reflects the solidarity of the international community with Muslims and in the fight against Islamophobia and hatred against Muslims. Sir, the Arab Group believes that the commemoration of this International Day will help strengthen dialogue and promote a culture of peace in all regards and to strengthen respect for human rights. This is an important occasion that allows us to highlight all of the manifestations of hatred and Islamophobia against Muslims, which sometimes lead to abominable acts, the last of which were the abominable acts perpetrated in Sweden, in Stockholm, by a group of extremists. These extremist acts must be condemned by the international community and must serve as a basis for the promotion of a culture of peace to combat discrimination and extremism and to strengthen dialogue between cultures and religions in order to establish peace and security and mutual respect. Thus, we will be able to establish an environment that is conducive to peace and understanding at the regional and international levels. Mr. President, the resolution adopted by consensus in this very room last year illustrates the need to pool our efforts at the international level to take serious measures to bring an end to discrimination and hatred and Islamophobia. Thus, the Arab Group reiterates its call upon all of the member states of the United Nations to implement the resolution in its entirety, because it is a question of our shared civilization, and we have the obligation to combat discrimination based on religion. Sir, the Arab Group commends the efforts being made as President of the General Assembly to strengthen the values of religious tolerance, and we also commend the efforts being made by the Secretary General of the United Nations and the Office of the Alliance of Civilizations in this context. By way of conclusion, combating Islamophobia is part and parcel of the purposes and principles of the United Nations, beginning with peace, security, and the protection of human rights. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I now request Mr. Christophe Forax, First Councillor, to deliver the group statement on behalf of the European Union.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The EU is strongly opposed to all forms of discrimination, hostility, and violence, including those based on religion or belief. This includes anti-Muslim hatred and discrimination. In many parts of the world, persons are killed, attacked, persecuted, or discriminated against because of their race, their religion or belief, or on any other ground. We recall that Article 18 of the ICCPR guarantees the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, including freedom to have, not to have, change, adopt, or stop adhering to a religion or belief, as a fundamental right of every human being, as well as to practice and manifest it freely, either individually or in community with others, in public or private. Many persons are persecuted and sometimes executed for criticizing religion, exercising their right to freedom of opinion and expression, or for exercising their right to change religion. The EU thanks all member states who signed the cross-regional joint statement on freedom of religion or belief, which was delivered during the last session of the Third Committee of the General Assembly as the EU initiative. The EU is also proud to present the annual Third Committee resolution on freedom of religion or belief in parallel with the resolution on combating intolerance presented by the OIC. The EU is firmly committed to protect human rights, freedom of religion or belief, and the right of persons belonging to minorities everywhere, regardless of their religion or belief. One example of this is the EU-OIC joint resolution on human rights in Myanmar and human rights violations against Rohingya Muslims and other minorities in Myanmar. Mr. President, in recent years, the EU has taken a number of important steps to counter discrimination, hostility, violence, intolerance on the basis of religion or belief. The EU Human Rights and Democracy Action Plan, for instance, is largely dedicated to protecting people, eliminating inequality, discrimination, and exclusion. In October 2021, the European Union presented the first ever comprehensive EU strategy on combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life. The EU has established a coordinator on who works with EU member states, European institutions, civil society and academia to strengthen policy response in the field of anti-Muslim hatred. The coordinator is the main contact point for Muslim communities and organizations working in this field in the EU. The European Commissioner for Equality recently underlined the EU's commitment to fight anti-Muslim hatred in all areas of life, including education, employment, and social policy. This includes gathering data, monitoring and tackling all instances of anti-Muslim hatred and discrimination. The EU also established a mandate of special envoy for the promotion of freedom of religion or belief outside the European Union. As the main sponsor of the annual resolution on freedom of religion or belief in New York and in Geneva, the EU advocates for a comprehensive and universal approach, which seeks to eliminate all forms of incitement to discrimination, hostility, violence, and intolerance directed against persons because of their religion or belief, including non-believers. We recall that freedom of religion or belief does not protect the institution of religion and its leadership as such, nor does it prohibit the criticism of religion or beliefs. Everyone is allowed to express their opinion on religion or belief, including to criticize them. The international community has invested much diplomacy to advance a concrete framework for combating religious intolerance, discrimination, and incitement to violence against persons based on religion or belief. The Rabat Action Plan, the Resolution on Freedom of Religion or Belief, and the 1618 Resolution, and the Istanbul Process all offer important tools and mechanisms designed to help us tackle these challenges in a human rights compliance manner. In our view, the UN should be impartial and have a universal and comprehensive approach rather than singling out one specific religion. We believe that the focus should be the protection of the human rights of individuals. Our common objective must be to address all forms of violence and hatred against victims from all religion and belief in an inclusive way. I thank you.
Thank you. We now move on to statements by individual member states, and I would request Her Excellency Ms. Amal Hamad, the Minister of the State of Palestine, to make her remarks.
شكرا سيد الرئيس معالي وزير خارجية باكستان.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Pakistan, on behalf of the State of Palestine, I would like to thank you for the efforts that you have made to convene this important meeting, and also the work that you are doing to combat hatred against Muslims and Islam, and to ensure that this is a priority in our work. I would also like to thank the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which is mobilizing international support for this issue, because it is a question of the peace and security of all Muslims around the world. We align ourselves with the statement delivered by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia on behalf of the Arab group. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, Muslim countries and the Muslim minority in many countries are the subject to hatred because of their ethnic identity. Their holy places, their beliefs, their holy book, the Quran, are subject to continued violations and are also stereotyped in a way that prevents them from exercising their rights and having equal opportunities with their peers. Our meeting today highlights the need to address Islamophobia and hatred against Muslims, and to take serious measures through the law and legislation and strengthening dialogue and intercultural and intercivilizational exchange. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, on this International Day, we should recall the contribution of Islam and Muslims to world heritage, including through translation and the transfer of knowledge. Islam, with its precepts and rules, is a religion of tolerance, compassion, and mercy, which does not in any case contradict human rights. Quite to the contrary, it respects human rights and promotes mutual respect and the promotion of a culture of peace and justice. Mr. President, the State of Palestine condemns and rejects any attempts at religious defamation and all of those that commit crimes in the name of Islam. We also condemn all of those that use these crimes as a pretext to incite hatred against Muslims and to threaten their peace, stability, and security. Let us not forget that the majority of the victims of terrorism are Muslims. Mr. President, Muslim holy places, in particular Aram al-Sharif in the occupied city of Jerusalem, is subject to constant threats due to Israeli violations and repeated incursions by settlers in Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is a provocation of the emotions of Muslims around the world, and from this rostrum we call for preserving the historic status quo of the city of Jerusalem and for respecting Palestinian sovereignty and the Hashemite custodianship of the Muslim and Christian holy places in Jerusalem. By way of conclusion, respecting international law, human rights, and respecting collective and individual national rights, and combating racism, discrimination, and hatred is the best way to build a better future for generations to come and for humanity as a whole. May the peace of God and His blessings be upon you.
I thank Her Excellency for her remarks, and I now call upon Her Excellency the Right Honourable Rukaya Nakayama, the third Deputy Prime Minister of the Republic of Uganda, to make her remarks.
Thank you. I am the President of the General Assembly, the Foreign Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is an honor for me to deliver this statement on behalf of the government of Uganda to commemorate the International Day to Combat Islamophobia. As a country that prides itself on its diverse culture and religious heritage, we are deeply committed to promoting tolerance and peaceful coexistence among our people, regardless of their religion or belief. I would like to thank the President of the General Assembly and the Foreign Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan in his capacity as the chair of the OIC group for convening this special high-level event. Islamophobia is a disturbing trend that we cannot ignore. It manifests itself in various forms, including hate speech, discrimination, and violent attacks against Muslims and their places of worship. These acts of intolerance not only violate the fundamental human rights of Muslims, but also threaten the stability and security of our communities and our country as a whole. Therefore, as we observe this day, we reaffirm our unwavering commitment to combat all forms of Islamophobia. We call upon all governments, civil society organizations, and individuals to join hands and work towards promoting respect, tolerance, and mutual understanding among people of different faiths. Mr. President, we must acknowledge that Islamophobia is often rooted in ignorance and fear. Education is therefore critical in changing the narrative and fostering a culture of tolerance and respect. We must invest in initiatives that promote interfaith dialogue, culture exchange programs, and education programs that highlight the contributions of Muslims to society. In Uganda, we have made significant strides in promoting religious tolerance and peaceful coexistence among different faiths. Our constitution guarantees freedom of religion and belief, and we have put in place laws to protect the rights of all citizens, including Muslims. We also encourage dialogue and collaboration among different religions, communities to promote understanding and mutual respect. We acknowledge that there is still work to be done, and we remain committed to promoting peaceful coexistence and combating all forms of intolerance, including Islamophobia. We urge all governments to take concrete measures to combat Islamophobia and other forms of religion intolerance, including enacting laws to protect the rights of all citizens and holding accountable those who perpetrate acts of discrimination or violence. In conclusion, the International Day to Combat Islamophobia is a call to action for all of us to unite in our efforts to promote religious tolerance and peaceful coexistence. Let us work together to eliminate all forms of Islamophobia and create a world where everyone is free to practice their religion or belief without fear of discrimination or persecution. I thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. For God and my country, I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I now call on His Excellency Mr. Sadat Onal, the permanent representative of Turkey, to make his remarks.
Thank you, Honorable Foreign Minister Zardari, and thank you to you and President Karusi for organizing this special event to commemorate the International Day to Combat Islamophobia. This is indeed a timely discussion. Islamophobia is a real and a rising threat. In spite of Muslims' immense contributions to the socio-economic life all over the world, they increasingly face systemic practices of denial of freedom of religion, hate crimes, and various manifestations of Islamophobia. Unfortunately, this goes hand in hand with the rising tide of populism and polarization that tend to dominate political discourse in many countries. We observe that many discriminatory approaches are increasingly moving into the mainstream with their inaccurate perceptions and representations about the Muslims. Islamophobia has now become a major threat to democracy as it feeds racist and xenophobic tendencies. As a result, desecration of Holy Quran and mosques, as well as violations of freedom of manifestation of religion, are on the rise. The despicable attacks recently perpetrated by anti-Islam instigators in Europe against the Holy Quran are blatant displays of hatred, intolerance, xenophobia, and discrimination. Allowing these abhorrent acts can never be justified under the pretext of freedom of expression. On the contrary, these are flagrant violations and indeed abuses of democratic freedoms and basic rights. Sacred values and symbols should be out of reach from charlatans, fanatics, and opportunists. Colleagues, Islamophobia is a kind of racism and should be dealt with accordingly. Our priority must be to marginalize Islamophobic discourse through unified and concerted action. We should strive to increase accountability and minimize impunity regarding crimes against Muslims. We should also firmly stand against efforts to associate Islam with violent extremism and terrorism. There are several steps that we must collectively take to counter Islamophobia. Standing up together against Islamophobic discourse and actions. Calling out any injustice we witness. Defending democracy and human rights. Promoting Islamic civil values and combating radicalism. And condemning intolerance, incitement, harassment based on ethnic origin or religious belief. We can make a difference if we can achieve unity and solidarity in both word and deed. The UN General Assembly's designation of March 15 as the International Day to Combat Islamophobia was a landmark step towards these objectives. It reaffirmed the international community's pledge to fight against all forms and manifestations of Islamophobia. And today, we reaffirm our commitment and determination once again. I thank you.
Thank you. And I request His Excellency, the Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Egypt, to make his remarks.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs of Pakistan, Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari. We're really grateful for the leadership Pakistan is exhibiting in organizing this very important high-level event today. Distinguished colleagues, our high-level event today, despite its ceremonial nature, should not be treated as such. It is incumbent upon us as proactive members of the international community to devise ways to address Islamophobia in all its manifestations, wherever and whenever it occurs. A year has passed since the universal membership of the UN adopted the resolution that declared 15th of March each year as an international day to combat Islamophobia. The participation today of our fellow members of the international family is most welcome. We hope that this participation reflects a true interest in the cause of combating Islamophobia in a manner that moves us from words to serious actions to address the growing manifestations of Islamophobia. As is well known to all of us, Islamophobia is not a new phenomenon, but one that has gained momentum over the years, requiring firm action. It is regrettable that we are gathered here today while less than 2 months ago, 2 incidents of burning and shredding the Holy Quran, Muslims' holy book, took place in 2 major European countries. Such incidents are driven by extremist ideologies and discourse and are met frequently with impunity. neither legal or political action is being taken to address such incidents. Egypt has always been keen to promote a culture of peace, dialogue, and understanding. It is only through these principles that we can sustain international peace and security, achieve development and prosperity for all our people. However, it is worthy of noting that the various manifestations of Islamophobia reflected in stigmatization, negative stereotyping, profiling, hate speech, incitement to hatred and violence are drivers for disrupting societal peace and stability, not only in the communities where they occur, but with transnational repercussions in a lot of cases. And under no pretext, such actions can be justified under the guise of freedom of expression. To the contrary, they constitute a violation of the human rights of Muslim communities and individuals. It is important to highlight that, for example, such actions target migrant Muslim communities, impacting their individual members and lead to their further alienation from the societies they live in. In consequence, societal divisions take the place of social integration. This not only constitutes a violation of the human rights of those communities, but also deprives the host countries from harnessing the potential contribution of individuals belonging to those communities. We have to collectively be aware that such manifestations are a breeding ground for anger, radicalization, and can lead to extreme violent reactions, regrettably. In a world fraught with crises and challenges, extremist ideologies and discourse take the place of rationality. Being aware of this challenge, we have to move from rhetoric to action, and allow me to propose the following. First, states in an individual and collective manner should devise legal and political measures to prevent manifestations of Islamophobia and address incidents as and where they occur, ensuring the delicate balance between freedom of expression and freedom of religion or belief and other fundamental human rights. Second, and as proudly an OIC member, collective efforts are needed to produce living documents of manifestations of Islamophobia. Third, a joint observatory of cases of Islamophobia should be established to collect data on its manifestations in order to provide guidance to states on how to address them. Fourth, addressing the exploitation of digital technologies and platforms for the dissemination of hate speech, discrimination, and incitement to hatred and violence against people based on their religion or belief. States have the primary responsibility toward the promotion and protection of human rights offline as well as online. As such, states should put in place legal and other measures to govern the use of digital technologies and platforms in a responsible manner. On the other hand, business enterprises, administrators, and owners of such technologies, operators and platforms have the duty to respect fully human rights and ensure the establishment of the required guidelines and codes of ethics and conduct to prevent discrimination, hate speech, negative stereotyping, profiling, stigmatization, incitement to hatred, and violence against people based on religion or belief. In conclusion, Honorable Minister, I would like to express our hope that we can come next year to observe this International Day again and again. We will convene the meeting to take stock of not words but actions that have been taken within and among states to address this heinous phenomenon that disrespects and infringes upon the human rights of more than 2 billion people of the world's population. We, us Muslims, thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for availing me that opportunity, and full respect and appreciation to the PGE, the Honorable PGE, to the Honorable Secretary General for being with us in the inauguration of that high-level event. I do thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And I'd like to request the permanent representative of Kazakhstan to make his remarks.
Thank you. Honorable Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, dear colleagues, distinguished delegates. At the outset, I would like to express my gratitude and appreciation to the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan for convening us today in its capacity as chair of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation Council of Foreign Ministers to commemorate the International Day to Combat Islamophobia. The delegation of Kazakhstan condemns all forms of discrimination, hostility and violence based on religion or belief. The escalation of Islamophobic attitudes and behaviors, including hate speech, discrimination and violent acts, remain a significant cause for concern. Particularly alarming are recent demonstrative acts such as the burning of the Holy Quran, which only serve to exacerbate tension between people and countries. At a secular and pluralist state, where Islam is one of the main religions being practiced, we fully support global actions that seek to combat intolerance, discrimination and religion-based violence. In this regard, Kazakhstan welcomes all measures taken by the United Nations to promote a culture of peace and dialogue among religions, especially in light of the growing spread of fear, misinformation and polarization. Mr. Chair, dear colleagues, our country has invested significantly in promoting freedom of religion, mutual respect, inclusion and social cohesion. We have fostered interfaith dialogue by hosting the Triennial Congress of Leaders of World and Traditional Religions, starting from 2003. The most recent Congress, the 7th in the series, was held last September, where we were honored to have the participation of the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Ahmed Al-Tayyib, His Holiness Pope Francis and other eminent religious leaders who gave messages of peace for the world. The Congress' final declaration, containing principles of religion pluralism, mutual respect, non-discrimination and equality, was distributed as an official document of the 77th session of the UN General Assembly, serving as a guidelines for governments, political leaders and international organizations in their pursuit of interfaith harmony. All these initiatives are in line with the United Nations concept of the culture of peace, which aims to promote dialogue and understanding between different cultures, religions and nations as a means of achieving peace and security, to bring to an end any manifestation of xenophobia, including Islamophobia. Dear colleagues, as an active member and former president of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, Kazakhstan joins the international community in commemorating the International Day to Combat Islamophobia. May this day serve us as a reminder of the need to stand together in the face of hatred and intolerance, and to work towards a world where every individual is respected and valued, regardless of her or his religion affiliation. To conclude, Kazakhstan reaffirms its commitment to promoting tolerance and non-discrimination as fundamental principles of a just and equitable peace. Thank you.
Thank you, and I request the permanent representative of Iran to make his statement.
In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. Thank you, Excellency Minister Zardari. It is a great honor to participate in this high-level event commemorating of 15th of March as the International Day of Combat Islamophobia. At the outset, I would like to associate myself with the statement made by the distinguished representative of Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela on behalf of the group of friends in defense of the Charter. I would also like to convey my appreciation to the Foreign Minister of Islamic Republic of Pakistan as well as the President of the General Assembly convening this meeting. Mr. Chairman, distinguished colleagues, today's meeting demonstrates the strength of our determination to effectively address Islamophobia, including, among other things, hate speech, discrimination, terrorist attack, and violence against not only Muslims but also their sacred beliefs, principles, and shrines. In this regard, the world continues to witness the unceasing assault on the Blaise Al-Aqsa Mosque on Al-Haram al-Sharif in Palestine, which is also accompanied by the daily aggression against its Muslim people at the hands of the Israeli colonial occupation authorities. The Muslim Ummah has also witnessed the public acts in a number of European countries wherein discretion the Holy Quran has taken place on the pretext of the freedom of expression. Furthermore, over the last few decades, a widespread network of anti-Muslim media outlets has emerged at an alarming and concerning rate. They are disguised as news platforms but promote a hostile and abusive environment against Muslims, which is inter alia a threat to their human rights. As such, it is high time for the international community, particularly relevant international organizations and countries that claim steadfastly work for the protection of human rights, to contribute to combating the hate speech and acts of hate against this considerable portion of the world's population. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, the Islamic Republic of Iran strongly deplores all acts of violence against persons based on their religion or belief, and reiterates its full solidarity with the victims of attacks emanating from Islamophobia all around the world. Furthermore, we highlight the utmost importance of commemorating the International Day of Combat Islamophobia, in recalling the international community's commitment to promoting a culture of tolerance and peace at all levels that are based on respect of human rights as well as diversity of religions and beliefs. I thank you.
Thank you. I now request the permanent representative of the Cooperative Republic of Ghana to make a statement. Oh.
Mr. President, any form of discrimination against individuals based on their religion is a flagrant violation of their human rights and contrary to the principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter, as well as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. As we commemorate this International Day to combat Islamophobia and spotlight the challenges still faced in this regard, let us recommit to do all we can to end Islamophobia and all forms of discrimination based on religion. My country was born on the heels of indigenous displacement, colonialism, slavery, and indentureship, making it a multi-ethnic and multicultural society. We are not without our challenges, but we take pride in our religious diversity and enjoy true religious harmony. We celebrate the faiths and festivals of various religions, including Islam, Christianity, and Hinduism. It is not uncommon to see on the same street, side by side, a mosque, a church, and temple, and their devotees intermingling after prayers. In fact, as is usually the case, 3 significant religious observances overlapped in 2022, as Muslims observed Ramadan, Hindus observed Chaitra Navratri, and Christians observed Lent. These observances culminated in a national interfaith event to promote and preserve respect for each other's beliefs and togetherness and dialogue. That said, Mr. President, the commemoration of the International Day to combat Islamophobia is indicative that as a global community, we have much more to do to address this issue and its adverse impacts on our Muslim brothers and sisters. The report of the Special Rapporteur on the Freedom of Religion or Belief to the 46th session of the Human Rights Council focused on countering Islamophobia and documented the immense challenges faced by our Muslim brothers and sisters, whereby their religious identity exposes them to discrimination, hostility, and violence. It also indicated that the dissemination of Islamophobic narratives is not confined to extremist propaganda, but extends to the media, academia, schools, and healthcare settings. Mr. President, Guyana remains committed to promoting a pluralistic society that respects the human rights of all, regardless of religious beliefs, and therefore calls on all states to take appropriate measures to combat direct and indirect forms of discrimination against Muslims. Negative stereotypes must be countered by education, sensitization, and social inclusion policies. As His Excellency President Mohammed Irfan Ali reminded, and I quote, "Islamophobia fosters hatred, prejudice, bias, and discrimination. It is disruptive to social cohesion and harmony and a threat to multiculturalism. It has no place in a civilized society." I thank you.
Thank you. I now request His Excellency the Permanent Representative of Jordan to make his statement.
Thank you, Your Excellency, the Minister Zardari, and I thank the delegation of Pakistan for convening this important meeting on the International Day to Combat Islamophobia. Islamophobia is a dangerous phenomenon that is a threat to peaceful coexistence among religions and cultures. Under the leadership of His Majesty King Abdullah Thani bin al-Hussein, may God preserve him, Jordan has endeavored to overcome this phenomenon by promoting intercultural and interfaith dialogue to reach peace and tolerance. This has taken the form of a number of initiatives launched by His Majesty, including Word of Truth, the Message of Amman, and the Week of Interfaith Harmony. All of these initiatives aim at promoting understanding and peaceful coexistence among cultures and religions. Mr. President, Jordan has played a leading role in the Arab region in highlighting Islamophobia and the need to address it by working through calling for coexistence among believers of all religions. Those initiatives highlighted the values of democracy and human rights, in addition to encouraging the establishment of training centers of individuals, in particular media men, to address Islamophobia and spread awareness of the risks entailed in Islamophobia on society, as well as focusing on the true tenets of Islam. That is, in addition to developing education curricula to increase awareness of the tenets of Islamic and Arab culture. Mr. President, since Islamophobia is a global phenomenon, this requires intensified efforts internationally by following a number of steps and measures to address it. That includes promoting public awareness on Islamophobia through outreach and education on Islam and Muslims, and making efforts to change the negative stereotype that is being promoted in some media and by some political groups and parties, the extremist ones. This is also related to linking Islam with terrorism by some governments and media, which in the past decades fueled Islamophobia. For now, Islam is perceived as a key element in any terrorist act. This is by the governments and media outlets. Therefore, it is important to make people aware that terrorism is terrorism, irrespective of the identity or the motive of the perpetrator. These measures include also promoting the integration of Muslims in the communities where they live in a manner that does not undermine their cultural identity or that will compel them to relinquish this identity or that undermines their religious beliefs. Integration can take the form of creating job opportunities, education, and protecting their basic rights. Third, promoting peaceful coexistence among communities through promotion of dialogue and cooperation in multicultural communities. Promoting and supporting academic research that contribute to understanding Islamophobia and its impact, as well as do the necessary policy analysis to address this phenomenon. Mr. President, freedom of opinion and the press are fundamental freedoms. There is no argument about that. But that does not mean that they could be abused or be used as a pretext to attack specific religious groups or discrimination against these groups by abusing the beliefs of these groups. And this is evident when it comes to Muslims, where Islam is being criticized and is being used as a way to discriminate against Muslims. Mr. President, Jordan believes that promoting interfaith and intercultural dialogue is a key tool to promote peace and social cohesion at the global level. And we call on all member states and relevant institutions in the UN and international organizations and other regional organizations, as well as civil society, private sector, and religious organizations, to organize and support all efforts aiming at increasing awareness at all levels to address this phenomenon in a manner that contributes to achieving peace, security, sustainable development in the world at large. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I now request His Excellency the Permanent Representative of Nicaragua to share his statement.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We thank you for convening this meeting and welcome the commemoration of the International Day to Combat Islamophobia on March 15, 2023, proclaimed under Resolution A/76/L41, adopted by this General Assembly. Nicaragua is proud to be one of the co-sponsors of this resolution. We salute the presence of His Excellency Mr. Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Nicaragua associates herself with the statement delivered by Venezuela on behalf of the Group of Friends in defense of the Charter of the United Nations. Mr. President, our work today urges a culture of peace, where love and solidarity prevail, to forge a future where different social, cultural, and religious expressions are included, celebrated, and joined together. Nicaragua condemns any action or manifestation of Islamophobia. Nicaragua believes that dialogue between nations, religions, and cultures should be encouraged to promote peace and social stability, respect for diversity, mutual respect, and to create, at the global, regional, national, and local levels, an environment conducive to peace and understanding among all humanity. We are convinced that consolidating peace is achieved by cultivating and practicing values, attitudes, and behaviors that promote love, tolerance, solidarity, cooperation, inclusion, respect for Mother Earth, and respect for cultural, religious, and ideological diversity, and respect for individual and collective rights in order to appreciate and respect personal as well as collective life, human dignity, freedom, the interculturality of people, and peaceful coexistence among societies. We call for solidarity and international cooperation to combat discrimination and violence based on religion or belief. Nicaragua, with its culture of peace, through our national legislation, promote the state policy for a culture of dialogue, reconciliation, work, and peace, with the aim of eliminating all forms of discrimination based on birth, nationality, political creed, race, sex, language, religion, opinion, origin, economic position, or social condition, and work always to promote respect for diversity and pluralism. I thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. I now request the permanent representative of Bolivia to make his statement.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, let me thank to you, Mr. Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan and Chairman of the 48th Council of the Foreign Ministers of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation for convening this special high-level event. Also, I thank the President of the General Assembly, the Secretary General of the United Nations, the Secretary General of the OIC, and High Representative of the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations for his participation in commemorating the first International Day to Combat Islamophobia, pursuant to General Assembly Resolution 76-254 of 15 March 2022. Bolivia associates itself with a statement delivered by Venezuela on behalf of the group of friends of the Charter, and we would like to add the following elements in national capacity. Articles 2 and 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights recognize with absolute forcefulness the inalienable right of all individuals and peoples to freely practice and profess a faith or religion, including the possibility of not having one. Therefore, diversity of beliefs is a constituent part of our societies and must contribute to peace. In that vein, Bolivia rejects intolerance, stigmatization, discrimination, and incitement to violence on grounds of religion or belief. Since 2009, my country has established itself as a secular state and firmly promotes intercultural and interreligious dialogue, considered as a central element to maintain a harmonious coexistence, recognizing plurality as one of the central elements of our plurinationality. In this regard, we regret that in recent years, acts of terrorism and violent extremism have been associated primarily with a religion, generating prejudice and discrimination against the Islamic faith. Finally, Mr. President, Bolivia reiterates its commitment to respect for human rights, cultural and religious diversity, and recognizes the Islamic faith as part of diversity that is part of the common goods that humanity has, and that it must continue to contribute to the construction of more tolerant and peaceful societies. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative from Bolivia, and I request the permanent representative of Suriname to make his statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. At the outset, I welcome the convening of this high-level event on the commemoration of the International Day to Combat Islamophobia today, convened by Minister Bilawal Bhutto Sardari and the President of the General Assembly. President, any form of discrimination against individuals based on their religion is a violation of their human rights and contrary to the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, as well as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In that context, the spread of Islamophobia is particularly alarming these days, for it emerged as a kind of racism characterized by xenophobia and the negative profiling and stereotyping of Muslims. Suriname is a country with a significant Muslim population, living side by side with other major religions and beliefs like Hinduism and Christianity. Suriname's constitution stipulates that everyone has the right to freedom of religion or belief, and that no one shall be discriminated against on the grounds of race, languages, religion, sex, race, origin, education, political opinion, economic position, or social circumstances or any other status. Laws had been enacted to promote the principle of non-discrimination and equality for citizens and foreign nationals, including provisions in the Penal Code and several labor laws. We therefore believe that we must promote sustained dialogue in the world to establish trust among people of different faiths and cultures, to harness the power of education and media to counter hatred, prejudice, and negativity, to promote a message of tolerance, peaceful coexistence, and interfaith and cultural harmony among all religions, races, and nations, and reiterate our common commitment to unity in diversity. I thank you.
Thank you. I now request the representative of the People's Republic of China to make his statement.
Your Excellency Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto, China commends you and the President of the General Assembly for holding this high-level event to commemorate the first International Day to Combat Islamophobia. Last year, thanks to the joint efforts of Pakistan and the OIC, the 76th session of the General Assembly adopted Resolution 76/254, proclaiming March the 15th as International Day to Combat Islamophobia. It was a great honor for China to be co-sponsor of this resolution. Our world today is undergoing tremendous changes unseen in a century. Global challenges such as the pandemic, climate change, the regional conflicts keep emerging. Religious intolerance and racial discrimination are getting worse. The hatred towards Muslims has escalated to epidemic proportions, and racist attacks such as discrimination against African descendants and hatred towards Asians occur with distressing frequency. To combat Islamophobia, we must first of all uphold equality. Every civilization and religion is special and unique, and none is superior to others. We must categorically reject claims such as superiority of certain civilizations and clash of civilizations. Second, we must promote common development. Underdevelopment is one of the root causes of discrimination and intolerance. We must support countries in choosing development paths suited to their own national conditions, promote inclusive development, and oppose decoupling, cutting chains, and unilateral sanctions. Third, we must cherish the role of education. We should help the younger generations enhance their understanding and respect for different civilizations and religions, and improve their ability for crossing culture communication and the ability to spot and combat false information. Your Excellency, both Chinese and Islamic civilization are ancient and significant civilizations with global influence. The exchanges between us dated back centuries and enjoy a deep historical foundation and solid support from our peoples. Over the years, we have always respected and trusted each other, and support each other on issues involving respective core concerns. We have always stood in solidarity and mutual support and shared a commitment to common development. China and the Islamic world have found a path of friendship and win-win cooperation among civilizations. This is a fine example of how to practice a new type of international relations, and it also provides useful experience on how different countries and civilizations can interact with each other. Dear Minister, in the face of the global challenges, all countries must come together under the UN banner. China welcomes the agreement reached by Saudi Arabia and Iran to restore diplomatic relations after talks in Beijing, which will provide new momentum to regional peace, stability, development, and cooperation. China is ready to work with Islamic countries to practice true multilateralism, promote the building of a community of a shared future for humankind, and together strive a better world free from discrimination. I thank you, Minister.
Thank you, and I request the permanent representative of the United States to make her remarks.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Secretary General, Foreign Minister Bilal Bhutto Zardari, and all those who've come together for this vitally important high-level event. Nearly 4 years ago to the day, a gunman stormed 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, and indiscriminately fired on worshippers. 51 Muslims were killed and another 40 were injured. Make no mistake, this was an attack on the entire Muslim community. And it was a painful reminder to us all of the deadly consequences of Islamophobia, of the epidemic of anti-Muslim hatred. 3 years after this horrific terrorist attack, the United Nations proclaimed March 15th the International Day to Combat Islamophobia. In doing so, we committed to advancing human rights and freedom of religion for all. And we formally recognized that Muslims are increasingly subject to discrimination and violence. Last year, the United States determined that members of the Burmese military committed genocide and crimes against humanity against Rohingya, many of whom are Muslim. We've also determined that the Chinese government has committed genocide and crimes against humanity against the predominantly Muslim Uyghurs and other ethnic and religious minority groups in Xinjiang. The international community must continue to condemn these atrocities. We must continue to demand accountability, and we must continue to call for all those unjustly detained in the PRC to be released and reunited with their families. For our part, the U.S. is committed to rooting out all forms of hate and intolerance at home and around the world. Last September, President Biden hosted the United We Stand Summit to honor Americans working to address discrimination and bigotry. And we have established an interagency group to counter anti-Muslim hatred and religious discrimination wherever and whenever we see it. Colleagues, as Muslims prepare for the holy month of Ramadan, a time of fasting and caring for communities, let us redouble our efforts to combat prejudice and violence, and let us do everything in our power to ensure the next time we gather for the International Day to Combat Islamophobia, our world is that much more peaceful, tolerant, and just. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now I request the representative of Malaysia to make his remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for convening this high-level commemorative event. It is almost a year since we adopted the landmark resolution 76/254 commemorating 15th March as the International Day to Combat Islamophobia. The resolution came at a critical time when racism, religious discrimination, and xenophobia against Muslims continue to intensify in the wake of the 11 September 2001 attacks. For more than 2 decades, the Muslim Ummah is battling intense misinformation, negative stereotypes, and unfounded suspicions, further fueled by the advent of social media. The discrimination and hostilities we face is astounding. Unfortunately, since the adoption of our landmark resolution, Islamophobic acts continue to persist. In the streets of certain cities, the Holy Quran was burned in the name of freedom of speech and expression. In some countries, Muslims are prevented from freely practicing their religion, or worse still, targeted by right-wing extremists because of their faith. Malaysia unequivocally condemns Islamophobia. It is a perversion of the truth and a manifestation of intolerance that feeds into extremism. While acknowledging that the exercise of freedom of speech and expression is a fundamental human right, we strongly disagree with the notion that the defamation of religion is not an infringement of human rights. The defamation of any religion constitutes a derogation of the right to freedom of religion or belief and is intimately linked to the incitement of racial and religious hatred. Rights should not be in competition with one another, nor should one right be seen as superior to another. We call on all individuals, organizations, and states to reject Islamophobia. Such ignorance and bigotry have no place in civilized society. We call for proactive efforts to combat the spread of false narratives, slander, and untruths concerning Islam. Allowing lies about Islam to fester is akin to condoning the violation of human rights of individuals professing the Muslim faith. It is crucial that we promote mutual respect among religions as well as harmonious relations and peaceful coexistence among peoples of different faiths and beliefs. We have a long way to go in this uphill task of combating Islamophobia. Malaysia will continue to fight against the ignorance and prejudices against Islam and against Muslims, and counts on the support of all members of the international community to combat this racist, xenophobic, prejudicial, and intolerant phenomenon. Thank you.
Thank you. I now request the representative of the United Arab Emirates to make her statement.
Mr. President, we thank you for holding this important session to commemorate the International Day to Combat Islamophobia. We commend Pakistan on behalf of the Organization for Islamic Conference for spearheading the efforts that have led to the adoption of the resolution establishing this International Day. Mr. President, the recent public incidents of desecrating the Holy Quran stress the need to counter intolerance and hatred against Muslims, as well as avoiding further polarization at a time when the world already faces common challenges. Such hateful acts, which were condemned by the UAE and the OIC, are not isolated incidents. They are a form of Islamophobia which has been spreading around the world and which negatively impacts the lives of Muslims as well as peace and security. I should like to emphasize here that permitting Islamophobia as an act of freedom of expression is utterly unacceptable. The establishment of an international day to combat Islamophobia by consensus has shown that all member states recognize Islamophobia as a global threat. The international community must reject, condemn, and prevent such acts which violate the freedom of religion and belief. There is also a need to take specific measures at various levels to end this phenomenon. In this context, I would like to focus on the following 3 key elements. First, fostering the values of human fraternity, such as tolerance and peaceful coexistence, is key to combat Islamophobia and build stable and peaceful communities. This is based on the experience of the UAE, as we have made these values a bedrock of our nation. Today, there are more than 200 nationalities who live side by side in the UAE in a peaceful and stable environment. We have also taken numerous practical measures to translate those values into practice, including by ensuring that the people of different faiths can freely practice their religion. We have also adopted legislation prohibiting all forms of religious and racial discrimination. Community-level engagement, including religious leaders, women and youth, is also critical to promote human values in both words and deeds. Second, we must continue to promote constructive dialogue between religions and cultures, including by providing platforms and creating institutions that support such efforts. Dialogue is critical to create mutual understanding between communities and to break any stereotypes towards Islam or any other religion. We note here that Islam has always called for peaceful coexistence and harmony among different peoples. The UAE has been keen to launch initiatives focusing on promoting mutual respect and dialogue between religions, such as the Abrahamic Family House, which was recently inaugurated in Abu Dhabi. This family house is an interfaith complex that includes a church, a mosque, a synagogue, and an educational center, a place where different faiths can communicate and worship peacefully side by side. The Council of Muslim Elders in Abu Dhabi also focus on launching global initiatives that promote peace, such as the East-West Dialogue, to clarify the teachings of Islam and promote peaceful coexistence. Third, we must tackle hate speech, misinformation, and disinformation about Islam. We must intensify media campaigns and other efforts that show the true Islamic values. Such efforts are critical as extremists and terrorist groups continue to distort religion, fuel conflicts, and spread destructive ideas that have absolutely nothing to do with Islam. Governments should also strengthen cooperation with the private sector to improve the tools of monitoring and removing harmful content online, and to prevent it from being used to spread hatred. We also need to celebrate the achievements of pioneering Muslims whose work contributed to the advancement of human civilization, contrary to what extremist groups claim. In conclusion, despite the efforts made to combat Islamophobia, the road ahead is still long. It requires us to work consistently and tirelessly to protect our societies from extremism and fanaticism. My country will continue working with all partners and in all fora to achieve this goal. I thank you, sir.
Thank you. I now request a representative of Morocco to make his remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I would like to thank the President of the General Assembly and you, Mr. Minister, Your Excellency Bilawal Bhutto, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Pakistan, Chair of the 48th Council of the Foreign Ministers of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, for convening this timely event to commemorate the International Day to Combat Islamophobia. We welcome also the participation of the UN Secretary General, the OIC Secretary General, and all the high-level officials to this important meeting. I seize this opportunity to renew Morocco's unwavering commitment and adherence to the values of openness, coexistence, peace, and constructive dialogue between all religions and beliefs. I would like also to start first with Morocco's strongest condemnation and opposition to Islamophobia and any form of discrimination and hatred against any religion or belief. Unfortunately, today's meeting coincides with the increasing and threatening manifestations of Islamophobia and Islamophobic acts. Painfully, hate speech, bigotry, stigmatization, discrimination, and violence against Muslims have exacerbated. In this regard, I would like to reiterate Morocco's strongest condemnation of the desecration and profanation of the Holy Quran and attacks on the sacred religious symbols of Muslims. The Kingdom of Morocco strongly condemns and expresses its categorical rejection of these dangerous and provocative acts that offend the feelings and deep beliefs of more than 1 billion Muslims. Indeed, these hateful acts, which can be in no way interpreted as a form of freedom of expression, constitute a violation of international human rights instruments. It should be stressed that Article 20 of the ICCPR clearly states that, and I say, any advocacy of national, racial, or religious hatred that constitutes incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence shall be prohibited by law and of citation. Thus, it is the duty of state parties to international human rights instruments not to allow such harmful and provocative acts. Also, international human rights instruments guarantee freedom of religion and belief. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, under the far-sighted leadership of His Majesty King Mohammed VI, Commander of the Faithful, a fervent advocate of values of peace and coexistence, the Kingdom of Morocco strongly preserves and strengthens its long tradition of religious and spiritual coexistence between religions, people, and civilizations for more than 12 centuries, as well as its leading role internationally to promote these sacred values. With its rich and deep-rooted civilizational history, Morocco has always placed coexistence and respect for the other among its national, regional, and international priorities through, among others, the following actions. 1. The Moroccan Constitution makes in its preamble religious and cultural coexistence an essential prerequisite. 2. Morocco's national immigration and asylum policy is based on the values of coexistence, integration, and humanism. 3. The creation in 2014 of the Mohammed VI Institute for the Training of Imams, Murshideen, and Murshidat, which offers humanist and moderate training in the practical and theoretical subjects of Islamic teachings to religious preachers. This practical and singularly moderate model of religious training has attracted many African, Arab, and European imams who have joined the Institute to learn about the values of coexistence and acceptance enshrined in the Islamic religion and the dangers of narratives of hatred, extremism, radicalization, and terrorism. 4. The inclusion of young people, women, and civil society actors at the centers of public policy making, which has contributed significantly to the promotion of democracy and human rights. 5. Contributing and attaching paramount importance to the effective implementation of the UN arsenal intended to promote interreligious and intercultural dialogue and to combat hate speech, in particular, the Rabat Action Plan on the prohibition of advocacy of national, racial, or religious hatred that constitutes incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence, the FEZ Plan of Action on the role of religious leaders and actors in preventing incitement to violence that may lead to atrocity crimes, the United Nations Hate Speech Strategy and Action Plan, and the Action Plan for the Safeguarding of Religious Sites, and as well as, last but not least, General Assembly Resolutions 73-328 and 75-309 on combating hate speech that Morocco has proudly initiated. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, before concluding, I would like to highlight that Islamophobia, in all its forms and manifestations, is a harm that is being experienced by many Muslims in their daily lives. Thus, the need is very strong for action, mobilization, and renewed commitment to build capacity, monitoring systems to effectively combat Islamophobia and all forms of intolerance, discrimination, and hatred around the world. The international community, with the United Nations at the center of action, needs to continue to strengthen the tools at its disposal to combat and counter Islamophobia, as well as all other forms of hatred against religions and beliefs. In conclusion, as we mark the commemoration of the International Day of Combat Islamophobia, the Kingdom of Morocco renews its call for more multilateral efforts to promote the values of coexistence and dialogue in all societies, and to consolidate respect for religions and beliefs, and to uphold the values of pluralism and diversity. His Majesty King Mohammed VI reiterated the importance of these values in his royal speech delivered during the opening ceremony of the 9th United Nations Alliance of Civilizations Global Forum held in Fez in the Kingdom of Morocco on November 2022, and I quote, "Politics speaks to citizens, religion speaks to their souls, and dialogue speaks to their civilizations. In all idioms, we must speak of and embrace peace. This injunction stems from the hopes of past and future generations." End of quotation. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. I now request the representative of Bahrain to make his remarks.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. يطيب لي بداية.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me first thank His Excellency, the President of the General Assembly, and to you, distinguished Foreign Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, for holding this high-level meeting to celebrate the International Day to Combat Islamophobia. Resolution 76 of 254, which declared March 15th of every year an International Day to Combat Islamophobia. there are many measures to incite hatred and violence in the world, particularly Islamophobic statements. We must ensure that the values of coexistence, understanding among all religions and civilizations must be upheld, in addition to international solidarity in confronting this phenomenon. The Kingdom of Bahrain, under the leadership of King Hamad al-Khalifa, as well as the government under the leadership of His Highness Hamad Khalifa, have had many initiatives to encourage understanding and coexistence nationally, regionally, and internationally. These include the office of the Center for Coexistence in the Kingdom of Bahrain and the organization of many international conferences on the subject, including the latest in Bahrain, East-West Dialogue for Coexistence, as well as the visit of His Holiness the Pope and the Imam of Al-Azhar. That, in addition to many awards for defenders of human rights and to youth organizations, the Institute has continued to provide guidance and development assistance to peoples throughout the world. The Kingdom has adopted the day of 15 April as International Day of Conscience as adopted by the General Assembly, and we look forward to more efforts by the international community towards more coexistence and to save future generations from the scourge of war and to combat hatred in order to achieve coexistence between peoples. Mr. President, the Kingdom of Bahrain renews its rejection of all acts of terrorism and extremism that run counter to international law as well as international conscience. We call on all religions and all religious leaders to fight against Islamophobia and to work towards tolerance and coexistence between cultures and religions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. I now request the representative of Sudan to make their statement.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me at the outset to express my congratulations to the Islamic Republic of Pakistan for holding this commemoration of the International Day Against Islamophobia as established by General Assembly Resolution 76254. We thank you for holding this event and for your defense of Islam as well as all Islamic religious sites. We thank the OIC as it takes up its role against this virus, the virus of Islamophobia that is rampant. Sudan has supported the statement made by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia on behalf of the Arab group. My delegation also appreciates the statements made by the Secretary General of the United Nations, the President of the General Assembly, as well as the Secretary General of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. All of them call for higher, better awareness of this dangerous phenomenon and the potential actual violence against Muslims and their institutions. This commemoration comes at the right time. Islamophobia has become a political tool or a way to explain terrorism. The world is witnessing a renewed current of Islamophobia in many places there has been much distortion of Islam, its sacred texts and sacred sites. We have seen discrimination and stereotyping of entire groups of people. We've witnessed humiliation of Muslims. This has allowed Islamophobia to regenerate, hence the need for further action. My delegation highly appreciates all the proposals made by different states in their statements on this phenomenon. Mr. President, my country, Sudan, supports the idea of a special rapporteur on Islamophobia and its current campaigns, and to investigate in this hateful practice in major democracies, as they are called, actions that run against all norms and values. We look forward to condemnation of such acts and to international solidarity, a recognition of diversity, and the building on the tenets of peace and coexistence. We reject how social media distort Islam and expand the hate speech. The world, Mr. President, must resort to all means and methods at all levels to preserve the dignity of the faithful of any religions that call for a peaceful world. We call for the protection of all religious sites. We call for the preservation of the right of Muslims to practice their religions. The culture of peace and coexistence must be threaded throughout the world in a way that obtains the results we look forward to from this commemoration of this important day, and all the values you underscored, Mr. Minister, at the beginning. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you. I now request Kuwait to make their statement.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. معالي السيد بلاول بوتو زرداري وزير خارجية جمهورية باكستان.
Sir, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Affairs of Pakistan and President of the 48th session of the Council of Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the OIC. First and foremost, let me thank you for convening this meeting, which coincides with the first anniversary of the GA's adoption of Resolution 264/77 to fight Islamophobia. I'd like to thank all the speakers who preceded me and who shed light on this important topic, which reflects international solidarity in this area. Mr. President, this meeting is an opportunity to promote a universal humanitarian and humanist dialogue based on the promotion of a culture of coexistence and tolerance. Indeed, international solidarity, as set forth in this resolution, reflects the need to act in concert at an international level in order to take serious measures to combat Islamophobia, hatred, and disinformation, which uses prejudice stripped of any evidence in order to point to Islamophobia and promote it. And in light of what we have observed recently and the series of acts of hatred and incitement of acts against Muslims, the most recent ones being acts that took place in Copenhagen, The Hague, and Stockholm. These heinous acts should be condemned firmly by the international community. Moreover, the United Nations should designate a specific body that would be responsible for overseeing Islamophobic practices to combat these hateful acts and to promote values of tolerance, coexistence, and to fight extremism, and also bolster the dialogue between faiths and religions and different cultures, and to promote mutual respect. that would also make it possible to reaffirm the values of the Muslim religion and faith, and specifically moderation, in keeping with the words of all-powerful God, who says within the Quran, "We have made of you a fair community so that you can bear witness." By way of conclusion, we would congratulate the President of the General Assembly for his efforts in order to strengthen religious tolerance, and we applaud the efforts undertaken by the Secretary General of the United Nations and the Bureau of the High Representative of the Alliance of Civilizations. And we hope that this meeting will provide a universal platform to uphold the principles enshrined in the United Nations charters, which starting with international peace and security and the protection of human rights. Thank you.
Thank you, and I request the representative of Indonesia to make her remarks.
Mr. Chair, on this occasion to commemorate the International Day to Combat Islamophobia, my delegation would like to extend our support and solidarity to our Muslim brothers and sisters who have been affected by this heinous form of prejudice and discrimination. We must acknowledge that Islamophobia is a grave concern and affects millions of Muslims globally. All forms of hate and discriminations have perpetuated stereotypes and prejudice against Muslims. This undermines social cohesion and can fuel extremism and terrorism. Indonesia stands ready to continue taking concrete steps to combat this scourge. First, we are committed to implement measures to promote tolerance and respect for diversity. Indonesia believes education is key to combating Islamophobia and promoting tolerance and respect for all religions and cultures. Furthermore, efforts are made through awareness-raising campaigns coupled with the promotion of interfaith dialogue and cooperation initiatives such as our flagship Indonesia Interfaith Dialogue Forum. Second, we will continue strengthening regional and global collaborations in combating Islamophobia. In this regard, ASEAN and the OIC plays an important role. Both organizations have member countries with significant Muslim populations, which also embrace the values of tolerance and moderation. Through the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, we share best practices, exchange information and expertise, and promote interfaith dialogue and foster understanding. Whilst the OIC continues to advocate for Muslim communities worldwide through diplomatic channels, public diplomacy, including high-level meetings, seminars, and publications. Third, we firmly support initiatives taken by the UN to reinforce measures in combating all forms of discrimination, including Islamophobia. We must make use of all avenues to address the root causes of Islamophobia, such as intolerance, prejudice, discrimination, and hate speech, through, among others, sharing of best practices, resources, and expertise. The UN bodies could also provide support towards the development of innovative strategies to promote intercultural dialogue, mutual respect, and understanding among different religious and cultural communities. Mr. Chair, as Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, we must recognize diversity not as a threat, but as a richness of our societies. Guided by this, let us create a future where diversity is celebrated and respected, and where all individuals can live in peace and harmony, as it reflects what Islam really is, a blessing for the whole world. O Rahmatan lil Alamin. I thank you.
Thank you, and I request a representative of Ukraine to make his statement.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Ukraine would like to thank you and the President of the General Assembly for convening this high-level event to commemorate the International Day to Combat Islamophobia. For Ukraine, interreligious and intercultural dialogue has always been a matter of priority. About 1 million Ukrainian Muslims represent a valuable and integral part of Ukraine's vibrant community. We appreciate their contribution to country's cultural diversity and interfaith harmony. My country has never been and will not be tolerant to Islamophobia. The government of Ukraine is committed to protecting and promoting human rights and fundamental freedoms of all its citizens, including the Ukrainian Muslims. The huge part of Ukraine's Muslim community belongs to Crimean Tatar indigenous people. They suffered in Soviet times. In particular, they were deported from their homeland by Stalin regime. As soon as Ukraine restored its independence in 1991, it opened the door for hundreds of thousands of Crimean Tatars to return to Crimea. Unfortunately, since 2014, Crimean Tatars have faced another wave of oppressions and intimidation after Russia's occupation of Crimea. Among 116 politically motivated cases against Crimean Tatars, at least 100 are religious-based persecutions. Russia has also banned the Majlis of the Crimean Tatar people and criminalized it. Despite the ICJ order, this ban has not been lifted. It's clear, therefore, that only the deoccupation of Crimea and other sovereign territories of Ukraine would restore respect to human rights and fundamental freedoms of Ukrainian citizens, including Ukrainian Muslims. Mr. Minister, since 24 February 2022, Ukrainian Muslims, as well as the entire Ukrainian people, have lived under the condition of full-fledged Russian invasion. Many of them have fallen victims to this brutal war of aggression. Many have joined the armed forces of Ukraine to defend their land, including Said Ismagilov, former Mufti of the Religious Administration of Muslims of Ukraine, Ummah. In one of his interviews, Mr. Ismagilov said, and I quote, "We are part of our country and a part of our society, just like everyone else. There are Muslims who serve as paramedics, doctors, volunteers, military chaplains, soldiers. There are Muslims who are politicians, governmental officials, and journalists. So like ants, we work for a common victory." End of quote. Distinguished colleagues, I avail of this opportunity to express my gratitude to all nations that recently voted in favor of the UNGA resolution, the principles of the UN Charter underlying the comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine. Our joint efforts will result in bringing the war to an end, restoring sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, eradicating hatred, including on the basis of religion or belief, and ensuring peace. Peace that we all, people of different religions and beliefs, nationalities and cultural background, will equally benefit. I thank you.
Thank you. The distinguished representative of China has requested the floor to make another statement. I, of course, give him the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation is compelled to make the second statement. China resolutely rejects the baseless accusation made by the United States just now in abusing today's high-level events of commemoration. The so-called genocide in Xinjiang is totally a lie of century fabricated by the United States. What is the genocide? The systematic ethnic cleansing and massacre of the Native Americans throughout the U.S. history is the real genocide and a crime against humanity. The indiscriminate killing of civilians, including women and children, by the U.S. military in Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq has already constituted war crimes. So we call upon the U.S. stop making lies for the political interests. The whole world has long been clear-eyed about the U.S. political agenda of using Xinjiang to contain China. Such an attempt is doomed to fail. The U.S. attempt of sowing discord between China and Islamic countries is doomed to fail. Thank you, Mr. President.
We have reached the end of the speakers list. I reiterate my profound gratitude to all participants for their gracious presence and important statements. Let me now deliver my closing remarks. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, today's commemoration of the first ever International Day to Combat Islamophobia with this high-level event in this, the great General Assembly of the United Nations, co-convened by the President of the General Assembly and the OIC, marks an important milestone in our endeavors to eliminate hatred and violence on the basis of religious beliefs. Today's events symbolizes global solidarity with Muslims across the world, global unity against what the UN Secretary General calls the poison of Islamophobia. The exchange of thoughts and ideas today has been very rich and fruitful. It is evident from today's discussions that there is a need to take the phenomenon of Islamophobia seriously. It should be called out and tackled at every step to create more inclusive and safe spaces for Muslims at individual, community, and institutional levels. Even today, in terms of the number of adherents, Islam is the second largest religion in the world. It is important for the world to realize that perpetuating discrimination, hostility, and violence towards Muslim individuals and communities undercuts the ability of affected Muslims to be Muslims and violates their basic rights and fundamental freedoms. I therefore reiterate that a comprehensive global action plan is the way forward to meaningfully and optimally address the growing problem of Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hatred. Excellencies, on this International Day, we should commit to leverage the positive messages of peace, justice and tolerance and compassion that Islam and in fact all religions offer. As CFM of the OIC and Foreign Minister of Pakistan, I warmly welcome the normalization of diplomatic relations between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Islamic Republic of Iran, facilitated by the People's Republic of China. This diplomatic breakthrough will instill confidence and trust and contribute to peace and stability in the region. And this speaks to the positive leadership of China on the world stage. Their attempts to promote unity, win-win cooperation, and dispute resolution. Mutual respect, interfaith harmony, and peaceful coexistence must remain the compass of our collective and individual efforts to eradicate religious intolerance, discrimination, and violence. Let us put away our prejudices and preconceptions. Let us stand in solidarity against hate and violence whenever and wherever it is committed. Let us aim to build bridges and advance together towards a paradigm of mutual understanding and respect. I thank you. And the event is now closed.